This webinar will address the disparities in teenage pregnancy and childbearing and use a socio-ecological framework to understand the causes and consequences of teenage pregnancy. We have an incredible speaker we're so excited to introduce you to. I will give you a very short blurb, but of course, more information about Dr. Teb can be found on the registration page. And on the next slide, I have just a little information. But Kathleen Teb, that would be Dr. Kathleen Teb, is a developmental and health research psychologist whose research focuses on developing, evaluating, implementing, and disseminating evidence-based interventions to promote health equity among diverse and underserved adolescents, young adults, and their families. Her specific area of study involve understanding and promoting factors that contribute to positive youth development, health behaviors, and resilience among adolescents and young adults, with an emphasis on sexual and reproductive health. And with that, Dr. Teb, we want to say welcome to Caltrin. We're so excited to be here for your presentation today, and take it away.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I want to give a special thanks to both you, Jessica and Casey, for fielding the questions in the chat and the Q&A. That's always a little tricky for me. And of course, to Carmen for providing that beautiful Spanish translation. I also want to thank Caltrin for this opportunity and my colleagues at the Maternal Child and Adolescent Health Adolescent Family Life program for connecting me with Caltrin. I've been involved with that program since 2012, and then going back, way back to the mid-90s, I did my dissertation work with a community-based intervention program for pregnant and parenting adolescents. I chose that work as a developmental psychologist. Two of my favorite age groups happened to be toddlers and teenagers, so it was a population where I could work with both of those age groups. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today, and thank you so much for carving out 2 hours of your time to share with me. So for today's objectives, I hope by the end of this training, you'll be able to describe the needs and challenges facing expectant and parenting adolescents. You'll be able to analyze the factors that contribute to their resilience. I always like to leave with a little bit of hope and be able to apply some of the best practices to support expectant and parenting adolescents and their children. So we've already covered a little bit of group agreements, but you're here because you want to be here, and I hope that you're engaged in this presentation. We won't have the opportunity to hear your voices, but please feel free to share your reactions, your comments, and your questions. All questions are welcome and valued. I looked over a little bit of the attendance sheet before today's training, and I was just so impressed with the range and the diversity of professional backgrounds. And I know we all come to this work with our lived experience as well. And so both our professional and our lived experiences is tremendously valued. I hope you have a little fun today, and please take care of your needs as we move along. I always like to start my work with a little bit of good news, and in the space of pregnant and parenting teens, there is some really great news. As many of you have heard, there have been steady declines in adolescent birth rates beginning at their peak in 1991 through 2023, which is the data that we have most recently available to us. And what's really wonderful about this data, and it hasn't always been the case, is that it's true for all age groups. We're seeing declines in all age groups of adolescents. And these declines represent an overall decline of about 79%, which is really quite dramatic and impressive. And not only have there been declines across all of the sub-ages within the adolescent range, but according to the Office of Population Affairs, there have also been dramatic declines in all racial ethnic groups, which is really terrific. These declines have largely been due to increased use of contraceptions. However, there are also more teens abstaining from sex or waiting to have sex until they are older. Most adolescents who have given birth are connected with their healthcare system and are using contraception. However, only 22% are using a LARC or a long-acting reversible contraceptive like the IUD or the arm implant. So that is an area where there's potential room for opportunity, especially when we're considering repeat births for adolescents. Repeat births is defined as 2 or more live births before the age of 20. And the good news is that those are also declining, though not to the same rate as first-time births. Closely spaced births, those less between 18 months between live births, they're about 15% of repeat births to mothers 19 years of age or younger. Closely spaced births do occur more frequently among adolescents than adults. And this close-spaced birthing at a young maternal age places both the child and the mother for increased risk of adverse health, educational, and economic outcomes. Despite the good news, there are ongoing and persistent unjust disparities in adolescent birth rates. In 2022, the adolescent birth rate of American Indian and Alaska Native, Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders, Blacks, and Hispanic adolescents were more than double the rate for white adolescents and more than 10 times higher than the rate among Asians. In addition, the adolescent birth rate really varies tremendously by state and region, with the highest rates in the southern states of the United States, as well as in rural regions. And here in our own home state of California, the county with the highest 3-year aggregated birth rate had a rate that was almost 5.5 times greater than the county with the lowest birth rate. So here's just a picture of the variations that we see at the state level in terms of repeat births to adolescents. Now, this graph would look really similar for age for the first births as well. So that's a little bit of background. But what I'd like to do with you now is let's imagine for a moment that instead of being on Zoom, we're at this beautiful mountain retreat. It's in a gorgeous setting with numerous small lakes connected by a steady stream. It's so beautiful. We go out for a morning walk right before our talk today. And on the walk, you come and approach a first of small lakes. And you notice a fish close to the shore. It's sick and it's near death. And the first question you might ask yourself is, gosh, I wonder what's wrong with this fish. But you don't think much more of it and you continue along your walk. As you head upstream, you come to a second lake and you see a few more fish that are sick and dying. At this site, you might wonder, there must be something wrong with this family or this school of fish. But as you travel further upstream, you come to the last lake and there's a large population of fish that are dying. You've become more concerned. Perhaps there's something wrong with the water. So you can continue upstream, even though you might be a little bit late to my talk now. As you bushwhack your way through the thickets and trees, you discover a pipe that's contaminating the groundwater. This story reminds us to pause and think about the source of health inequities and disparities. Drivers of inequities go beyond the individual behaviors, beyond the individual fish, beyond the family. When we see persistent disparities, like the ones that I showed you in adolescent birth rates and variations by region, it suggests we need to go upstream and look at the lake and the source of the groundwater flowing into the lake. The takeaway from this approach and this lens is that we have to stop blaming individuals, focus on root causes, and identify what we can do to both prevent pregnancy and provide effective supports, especially for pregnant and parenting adolescents, because adverse outcomes are not inevitable. These upstream factors are often referred to as social determinants of health. most of you have heard of this term. However, in my view, they're neither social nor their determinant. They're really upstream drivers that shape the conditions in which people are born, grow up, work, and live. And they stem from policies and practices that create unequal distributions of resources and powers that lead to inequalities in income, education, healthcare, transportation, and outcomes. The strongest determinants of adolescent young adult health worldwide, as determined by a special issue that was done in the Lancet Journal, are structural factors. So in communities where adolescent birth rates are high, these are the same communities that often have high levels of poverty, more limited employment and educational opportunities, and advancements for young people and their families. So as was mentioned in the introduction, a framework that I find particularly helpful as we think about both risk and protective opportunities, as well as opportunities for an intervention, is the socio-ecological model. This was developed by Yuri Bronfenbrenner. It dates way back before the concept of social determinants of health, back to the late 1970s. And it's really valuable in understanding the complexity of the vast range of influences on development and health outcomes. What was unique about Bronfenbrenner is he emphasized how all areas of development and behavior can be influenced by one another and the whole environment surrounding them. He was actually on the committee that established Head Start. It was one of the first programs as part of the War on Poverty, actually, that really, whoops, sorry about that. That really said that children needed a comprehensive program to give them a head start in school. So not just preschool programming, but comprehensive medical assessments, hearing, vision, dental, and then provided also support for parents as well with immunizations and linked to community resources. This socio-ecological framework also considers the complex interplay between multiple levels of the ecosystem, the individual, interpersonal, and the larger macro sociocultural factors. Each component of the system influences one another in complex and multifaceted ways. And as you can see at the bottom of the cycle, it also has influences that cut across time based on family origin and intergenerational contributions. So it explains risk, but it also considers the flip side, the factors that can be a positive force for optimal development. And this model also suggests that in order to promote healthy development and prevent problems, it's necessary to act across multiple levels of the system. And many of you do that in the work that you do, in the advocacy, in the leadership, and the policies that you promote. Many of you know this, but I'm going to go through a few examples that kind of illustrate this in a very concrete way. So factors that contribute to adolescent birth rates include socioeconomic status, access to income and education, lack of knowledge around sexuality and poor sexual and reproductive health communication with parents, clinicians, and ineffective or non-use of modern contraceptions. There's also cultural and peer norms, physical and sexual violence, experiences in foster care place youth at a higher risk, and adolescents who are bisexual and lesbian are more likely to have been pregnant than their heterosexual peers. I think what's really interesting too is we see a complex interplay of context and puberty development. So the timing of puberty takes place in a social cultural context and has changed considerably over the decades. So currently, the age of first menarche, when your onset of puberty in the US for girls, is 12 and a half years. The average age of first sexual intercourse is 17 years, and the average age of the first birth is 30 years. So the point of this is that the time period in which a young person is at graded risk of unintended pregnancies and STIs spans many, many years. And the vast majority of births to adolescents or pregnancies to adolescents are unintended. Some estimates are as low as 50%, and some of the work that I've done and others of my colleagues find it in the high 80s, even 90%. So what you see here is um, after marriage and first birth, their risk diminishes, but it doesn't completely disappear. The other point I want to make with this graph is, in addition, between the age at first sex marriage and childbearing, this divide has grown tremendously. Um, and what it shows is that adolescents and young adults really need to have access to evidence-based information and the full range of contraceptive options to protect them from unintended pregnancy. And unfortunately, not all have such access. So at the national landscape, the macro level of the Brenner model, here's sort of a idea of what's going on across our country. Only 36 states and the District of Columbia require public schools to even teach sex ed. 39 states and DC require students to receive HIV education. 28 states mandate both sex ed and HIV ed, and only 22 states, only 22 states require that this be medically factual or technically accurate. And the definitions of what medical, factual, and technically accurate are really vary. So this is the national landscape. Further, at the macro level, here's a map of healthcare centers across the US that offer the full range of contraceptive methods. Of the 66 million women of reproductive age living in the United States, more than 19 million are in need of publicly funded contraception. And of those who are in need, 97%, 97% of these women live in what we call contraceptive deserts. That is, they lack reasonable access in their county to a health center that offers the full range of contraceptive methods. This is even worse for adolescents. So to address this, we're working to advance policies that promote reproductive rights and justice, and pushing back against restrictions, not just for contraceptive access, but to promote sexual and reproductive education and care for all adolescents. So this is just like the big picture landscape. And I think it's really important to keep this in mind when we're working with our young people and their families, because we don't know their lived experience and the challenges that they face in trying to get access to education and resource and support, so they have equity in their sexual and reproductive health decision making. So when we talk about these disparities and these access challenges, the challenges for expectant and parenting youth are even greater. So all parents, I'm a parent of two, they're now 23 and 19. They face the pressure of juggling the needs of baby with work and life. These pressures are even greater for adolescents. Identity formation is a key developmental task of adolescents, and I've been so excited that Caltrim, hopefully they'll be inviting me back to talk about adolescent development at one of the upcoming trainings. But they have to balance school with parenting, their personal life, often with limited resources. So what we see often in adolescent parents is they often experience tremendous amount of stress, anxiety, and depression. And these mental health issues are both a cause and a consequence of early childbearing. There's also the intersectionality of adolescent development and early parenthood. So my brief crash course in adolescent development here is that identity formation, as all of us know, is a major developmental task in adolescence. This process is multifaceted, it's complex, and it's gradual. There's cognitive development. During adolescence, the cognitive capacities undergo a set of dramatic changes, and we now know that brain development continues well up to age 25, with the prefrontal cortex involved with executive functioning being the last to fully develop. And then there's psychosocial developmental changes during adolescent development regarding emotional regulation. There's an increased emphasis on peer relationships, heightened participation in peer activities, and a heightened attunement to social comparisons. And then, of course, independence. Adolescence is also marked the gradual development of independence and emancipation from the family. So these are the cornerstones of adolescent development. So what are the implications of these factors for adolescents who are pregnant and parenting? And you feel free to take a moment, reflect on this, put your responses in the chat, in the Q&A. I'd love to hear from you as to what you think these implications may have. And when we talk about implications, we're not generalizing to all pregnant and parenting adolescents. I want to be really clear about this, trying to speak in generalities.
Hi, Kathleen. It looks like you do have a question in the Q&A pod for you.
Okay, would you mind reading that for
Yeah,
me?
absolutely. Kelly asks, I'm curious, how are lesbian teens more likely to have been pregnant than heterosexual teens?
Yes. Well, I think this stems to a lot. That's a great question. Thank you for that. It's really multifaceted. These relationships are not necessarily always exclusive. They may identify as one, but it's adolescence is a time of experimentation. So oftentimes clinicians don't think about talking about contraception with youth who express themselves as being LGBTQ. They don't get the same types of access to information. And so when they do engage in sex, they may be less likely to protect themselves. So I think that's a huge factor in that particular population, at least according to the research. I hope that answers your question. So when we think about, I'll just go ahead and share a few thoughts as you're kind of thinking about the implication of the intersectionality between adolescent development and being a teen parent. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of my favorite age groups is toddlers, and they are known for testing their boundaries. They often refuse to listen, they throw tantrums, they say no constantly. They're really expressing who they are. They're asserting their sense of self, which is really beautiful, but it can also be really frustrating. And especially for younger parents who might have higher expectations of what their children should be doing, or a desire to maintain control, or maybe less knowledgeable about child development, so their expectations are a little maybe not as realistic. It can feel really frustrating for them, and it can diminish their confidence in themselves as parents, and that has an impact on their identity. We also hear that teens are having to develop their own identity while their children are developing their identity. So they're having to sort of jump forward in simultaneously both their own development as an individual as well as their identity as a parent, which is not necessarily always a bad thing, but it does present different challenges. And then in terms of cognitive development, you know, if they're still working on their own ability on emotional regulation and executive functioning, it may be a little bit more challenging for them to respond sensitively or proactively, or they might have more unrealistic expectations of their child development. Toddlers and teens both go through emotional roller coasters. When you compare them to younger age groups and older age groups, they can go from joy to frustration in a matter of seconds. And they don't toddlers don't always have the ability to express gratitude or acknowledge all of the work that their parents are doing, and parents can feel unappreciated. They can lead to doubts about their effectiveness, and this is sort of all amplified with adolescents. And then in terms of their peer relations, it can having a being pregnant or parenting can lead to isolation, stigma, discrimination. There's factors that can certainly counter this, but these are some of the challenges that they have that they uniquely face. They may need to rely on their family more at a time when they're wanting to become more independent, and it may make it more challenging for them to pursue both their school or vocational training while they're also juggling this responsibility of parenting. So those are just some of those intersectional issues. There's additional challenges that are amplified by parent and offspring characteristics. As I mentioned, especially for closely spaced birth, there's a higher risk of intellectual and developmental delays. This can affect the child temperament, making a child more difficult to soothe or more reactive, and that can create additional challenges between the parent-child relationship. Balancing school, parenting, their personal life with limited resources can really contribute to additional stress, anxiety, and depression. Then
Kathleen,
there's the issue. Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. We had a question in the chat. I want to make sure that we don't skip past.
Yes.
So Portia had asked, in some of my work, I have found some of the teen parents that have developmental deficits struggling with their new parenting role. Any other factors or supports to offer or consider?
This is great, and this is the focus of the talk. So I'm going to start here by talking about some of these challenges that we kind of need to be aware of and consider. And it sounds like you have a lot of great experience in this space. And then I'll be talking about some of the research and evidence-based strategies. So stay tuned. So other challenges they face there's the issues around co-parenting with their partners. You know, adolescent fathers are often unmarried at the time of conception and birth. There's a lot of societal stigma and exclusions regarding involving fathers in the birth and the early care of their infants. Fathers can play an important role in child rearing and emotional support, but this can also be difficult to navigate if depending on the nature of that relationship. Obviously, they're early in their development. Teens' parents' responsibilities regarding custody, healthcare, and finances are all complicated by co-parenting. And then there's the issues around legal rights in relationships to co-parenting. Then there's also the level of co-parenting with their parents, which presents both intergenerational challenges and opportunities. Early parenting can imply an early onset of grandparenthood at a time when some of the parents of the teen parents may not be willing to accept this role or may be really uncomfortable with this role. And then, of course, there's a range of cultural factors as well. And I think these cultural factors are really critical. There's a range of factors, of intergenerational factors around sleep, social media use, eating, healthcare, immunizations, daycare. All of these things are beliefs and attitudes are influenced by cultures, and sometimes they can be compatible with broader sociocultural norms and expectations, and sometimes there can be conflicts around that. So understanding and appreciating these cultural factors and these layers of the onion, I think, are really critical. And why are we so concerned about stress? I'm going to talk to you about some really exciting, relatively new research around the relationship between stress, especially chronic stress, and its impact on both maternal and child outcomes. So recent research from longitudinal studies that follow groups of parents and children over time find that multiple forms of chronic stress can have adverse effects on fetal development. And there are now biomarkers of how we're assessing the impacts on fetal development. We're seeing increased cellular aging, that they're more insulin resistant. can alter neuroendocrine functioning, and it can accelerate the epigenetic age. And we now know, with a recent study that was just published last year in 2024, the mechanisms involved in this are actually altering genetic expression. So they've been able to look at biomarkers and RNA sequencing, and they are now starting to see that chronic stress actually affects RNA sequencing in gene sets that are involved in placental developmental processes. Maternal prenatal stress has been now shown to predict infant outcomes in terms of the parasympathetic reactivity. So as opposed to the sympathetic system, which is flight or flight, parasympathetic reactivity is involved in, the body's response to stress and relaxation. It also contributes to infant illnesses, both infectious and non-infectious diseases. We're seeing increased cardiovascular response to stressors, as well as it takes longer to recover from the stress. And then we're also seeing impacts on rapid infant weight gain is a reaction to maternal prenatal stress. All we think are starting to be moderated by these genetic expressions. Maternal exposure to early childhood adversity is also now showing to be predictive of maternal and child outcomes at a population level. We see level and rise of the placental corticotropin releasing hormone changing and affecting that. We're seeing it play a role in maternal pre- and postnatal depression. And then this is all affects infant development, not just a one and done, but through behaviors that have a cascading effect on offspring's adaptive skills and their mental health. So not only do we seeing on maternal effects, placental effects, early childhood, these longitudinal studies of over 50,000 mother-child pairs from over 80 cohorts are now looking into outcomes in early childhood and middle childhood. And we're seeing effects in increased risk of behavioral and emotional difficulties, these mental health indicators, hyperactivity, challenges with executive function, and then physical health. And this is continuing into middle childhood. And a study that was published in the Journal of American Medical Association in 2021 showed that high ACEs independently, so when you controlled for other factors, predicted poorer mental health and physical health at age 45. It's really critical to understand that these risk factors and these risks are at the population level. They are not predictive at the individual level. It's a little counterintuitive, but I think this is where we're going to see, and what I want to emphasize on the aspect of hope. So ACEs scores, the adverse childhood experience scores, have very poor accuracy in predicting which children actually have adverse mental health problems through 18 years. And they've done they've analyzed this looking at under the area curve statistics. And what I want to the take-home message I want you to show is that there's only a 58% probability that a random participant who developed a mental health problem had a higher ACE score than a random participant who did not. That's only an 8% above chance that someone with a high ACE score is going to have adverse mental health outcomes. So it is not predictive at the individual level. And this is a really good thing, because it points to what I have emphasized my entire career on, and that is resilience. And this was a photo. I do a lot of hiking in the mountains, hence the mountain lake analogy, but this is a photo I took on one of my hike, just really in awe of the flowers that grow amongst the most harshest conditions. And I'm going to quote Sylvia Earle, who's a famous biologist who studies coral reefs, and she's always looking for hope spots. And I really carry that into the work that I do. And as we all know, resiliency is the ability to thrive despite adversity. So I hope you'll come with me on another journey. Why don't we take a quick trip to the island of Kauai? And this is where I really got my roots in my understanding of resilience. I had the great fortune and opportunity to be mentored by Dr. Emmy Warner, who's considered the godmother of resilience. And she was really interesting because what she did was she followed an entire cohort of 698 children born on the island of Kauai in 1955. And she followed them for over 40 years. At the time in which she was doing her work, and when I was in my graduate studies, most of the research of what we knew about child development and adverse outcomes was stemmed from retrospective studies that took youth who were in juvenile justice system, criminal experiences, youth who experienced truancy, foster care, so on and so forth. And they looked back and asked them, what went wrong in your life? What Emmy did, and the next subsequent generation of researchers did, was they flipped that and looked prospectively at child development. And it really transformed our thinking and our understanding of fundamental aspects of development. So instead of focus solely on the risk factors that stem from these retrospective studies about what went wrong, they were asking the wrong question. And the prospective studies allowed us to shift our understanding and take a closer look at protective factors. Excuse me. So many in this cohort on the island of Kauai experienced what we now call ACEs. They were born and raised in poverty. They had experienced pre or perinatal complication. They lived in families troubled by chronic conflict, divorce, parental pathology, and were reared by mothers with less than an 8th grade education. 2/3 of the children who had experienced 4 or more of these risk factors by age 2 developed learning or behavior problems by age 10 and had delinquency records by age 18. Most of them, 2/3, developed serious learning and behavioral problems that persisted. Yet, 1/3 did well despite adversity. They were resilient. So, what happened to the troubled teens, even part of the 2/3 of the sample? That included adolescent mothers and delinquent boys and individuals who struggled with mental health problems. Among the most potent forces for positive change for these youth in adulthood were continuing education at community colleges, educational and vocational skills acquired during the service. There was the GI Bill at that time. Marriage to a stable partner, having a religion with active participation or a sense of faith, recovering from a life-threatening illness or accident, and also psychotherapy, though that was a little bit less predictive. What helps young people adapt through adversity, and we've learned this through this study and others, that their ability to handle emotions and respond proactively, the sense of a future, optimism and hope, self-awareness, self-efficacy or confidence in their skills and their abilities, problem-solving skills, and social competencies. And these cluster in 3 areas: the individual, the family, and the community. Again, you're starting to see that Bronfenbrenner model kind of come through in our work. And I'm not going to go through these in great detail because you have them here, but there's a range of individual characteristics, family characteristics, that attachment, expectations, encouragement of independence and faith in their children. And then, of course, a sense of community, those relationships with non-parental caring adults, a nurturing, responsive atmosphere, and opportunities for meaningful contributions. So here's a poll. You may have seen this question before. Did retrospective studies inform our understanding of resilience? True, false, or I don't know. I'm not seeing the poll, but perhaps you all are seeing it. Give you a second to answer here. Okay, and the result is false. I didn't do a very good job. Retrospective studies did not enhance our understanding. It was the prospective studies that really followed youth over time, this entire cohort that followed them to understand not just the factors that went wrong in their lives, but what went right. And we'll go over that in a little bit more. Thank you for being honest with those your answers there.
And Kathleen, we
So
have a couple more questions in the Q&A. I just didn't want to get too far from the content or from the subject that the question
sure.
and so Tracy asked, can you please define cellular aging for the fetus?
Basically, what it means is that it ages at a faster rate than a typically developing fetus. So it ages atypical from what a normal fetus would develop, and we're seeing that also carry forward in childhood as well. It's an indicator that there's been adverse exposure to stress that's having actual biological implication in terms of increasing the rate of aging, premature aging.
And then Emmy asks, have they found any correlation with autism and moms with high ACEs / adverse childhood experiences?
That is a great question. I am not an expert in autism research, but I would be happy to look that up and get back to you via the Caltrin supports.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
And then she has one more as well. What makes some resilient and not others, even when they face the same exact adversities?
Exactly. So it's these clusters of protective factors that yes, there's some at the individual level. Many of those are not malleable. Like you can't necessarily change a child's temperament. However, if you have a baby that's difficult to soothe, providing more sensitive, caring caregiving can help that child develop skills to self-soothe. There's factors at the family level, being caring, supportive, open communication, offering support of independence, those kinds of things. And then at the community factor, the role that many of you play as caring, non-familial supportive adults, that seems to be one of the biggest factors. Another malleable protective factor, or a factor that we can affect, especially for pregnant and parenting adolescents, is increasing their knowledge of child development and supporting them with parenting skills so they can provide more sensitive and responsive parenting to their children's cues. So that is really the thrust here, is what can we do to buffer these stresses and better support the population that we serve. So I'm going to conclude with a few evidence-based practices and programs. Positive youth development. The most effective programs are built on a positive youth development framework. And this is the core of the maternal, child, and adolescent health program for expectant and parenting youth. I think we have a few of those folks on today's webinar. And so these are the core foundations of that program. It acknowledged the positive youth development approach, acknowledged that all youth have strengths and skills, that we work to build and support these strengths and skills. We foster caring relationships by modeling it, by helping them understand what healthy relationships are, and helping them identify healthy relationships in their lives. supporting meaningful youth engagement, where they have a role in decisions that affect their lives, and also creating opportunities for them to make meaningful contributions to their family and their community. So that can be done all in cohort. And these are all factors that contribute to resilience, that help youth do well despite adverse experiences. I'm going to skip this activity because of time, but one of the things teens and adolescents face is stigma, and adolescents are often referred to as hyperactive, impulsive, stubborn, willful. They test their limits, they're explosive, they're defiant, they're withdrawn, they're aggressive. They're often, pregnant and parenting teens can be seen as victims. And what a positive youth development approach is works towards reframing these harmful deficit words into strengths. So for instance, instead of being hyperactive, you might use the term energetic. Impulsive, a strength-based approach would be responsive, quick on your feet. Stubborn, stick to what you believe in, or you're determined. Testing limits, you're creative, you're out of the box thinker. Explosive, maybe you're just highly energetic. So these are the kinds of things that we want to start being aware of, our implicit and our explicit biases, the biases of those around us, and reframing things in a positive way to really gain the rapport and support and help teens, and especially pregnant and parenting teens, be aware of the tremendous strengths that they have. Protective factors cluster into three core constructs. That's caring relationships, high expectations, and as I said, the opportunities for participation and contribution. And what these protective factors do is they build resilient strengths that improve emotional regulation, that build hope and a sense of purpose through the fact that they have greater confidence in themselves and their ability to succeed. It supports the development of positive identity and increases their problem solving and social competence skills. Caring relationships, every single research of resilience done across almost every country in the world with a wide range of adversities show how young people benefit from positive, caring adults. Fostering high expectations. Again, this is core to the AFLP model. You express belief in youth that they have strengths and skills. I see strengths in you. I believe in you. Providing youth with opportunities to reflect on and talk about and problem solve and make decisions that are meaning to their lives, give them a sense of agency and foster that sense that they're making meaningful contribution. And then, of course, depending on where the youth is at and the opportunities are available, encouraging them to participate in their family, school, and broader community. It's critical that our services are developmentally appropriate. Youth vary in their development. Development is influenced by age, by environment, by experiences, by stress. And even as adults, when we experience stress, we're more likely to revert back to lower levels of functioning, right? Just because it's the more part of our lizard brain, that more reactive functioning. So it's important to understand and respond appropriately to the developmental level of each young person. And then, of course, as I talked about, the role of culture is critically important. Trauma-informed care, I know you're having a topic on this coming up, and I was really excited to see that. But trauma-informed care really approaches this population with an understanding and sensitivity to their potential past trauma experiences by creating safe and supportive environments, empowering them to make decisions and addressing triggers that might arise during interactions with services and service receipt. Implementing trauma-informed in care, I won't go into this in great detail because you're going to have an in-depth training, but it's really all of the sensitive ways we want to respond to young people by validating their feelings and building trust and supporting them with coping mechanism techniques, connecting them with community resources, because as an N of one, we can't do it all. We have to link them up with other supports. And then motivational interviewing techniques. And I know that there's also going to be one on motivational interviewing. So in brief, motivational interviewing is that collaborative conversation that strengthens a person's motivation and commitment and readiness to change. And it actually has shown to support behavior change, especially effective with adolescents. And there's some great acronyms that you can use to remember it. The ORS, which is using open-ended questions, reflective listening, affirmations, and summarizing. And there's lots of strategies for trying to help an individual come to experience their readiness for change and move towards change. And I hope these will get covered on your MI talk too. These strategies help youth understand the reasons they want to make the change, the strengths they can bring, the barriers they might face. And as you're having these conversations, you can help them understand the supports and link them with resources for them to accomplish those changes. So quick true or false, MI is an evidence-based technique that consists of 3 main strategies. And I'm just gonna, let's close this early. Okay, there are 3 strategies, but there are way more than 3 strategies, right? The ORS consists of 4, and there's all of those other readiness changes too. So really being well equipped and versed in some of the MI strategies, I think is great. So if you want to learn more about MI, I'm going to put a plug for the next Caltrin upcoming trainings. But beyond trauma-informed care, there's a newer emerging approach that that extends trauma-informed care, and it really emphasizes that expectant parenting youth are much more than the worst thing that happened to them. It acknowledges trauma and its influence on mental health, but it moves beyond treating emotional and behavioral symptoms by focusing on what youth want to achieve. It's an asset or a strength-based approach that builds on their knowledge, their experiences, and their skills. So it's a shift away from what happened to you to what's right with you. And it really emphasizes a culturally grounded asset approach to supporting individuals in the healing processes from trauma. So it empowers both individuals and their communities, because individual trauma often comes from community trauma or communities that have experienced trauma when we think about those upstream social drivers. So we want to promote resilience and well-being rather than just simply addressing symptoms. It comes from the idea that people aren't harmed in a vacuum, that they are harmed by the root causes within institutions and policies and inequitable access to resources. And then it's grounded in that asset-based approach to supporting individuals and communities, and empowers them to build resilience and really emphasizes that. And then when people advocate for policies and opportunities that address the causes of trauma, such as lack of access to mental health, reproductive health services, inequal access to income and education, it can contribute to a sense of purpose, power, and control. I'm going to skip that poll, but I'm going to conclude on just a brief overview of some of these really amazing programs that are starting to emerge for pregnant and parenting adolescents. The evidence is still relatively new. The AFLP PYD model is a case management model that's based on positive youth development and resilience. And this is an evidence-informed model that I just really encourage you to learn more about. It's a fabulous program that I've been involved with since 2012. It involves youth in identifying their strengths, relationships. It takes them through goal setting and life planning and a variety of activities to do that. And I encourage you to go to their website to hear more about the stories from teens. It's had incredible outcomes in terms of promoting graduation rates, and employment rates, and getting youth connected to medical care, prenatal care. And while I said earlier that the average LARC use rate for teens nationally for pregnant and parenting teens is about 22%, this study showed that they're about 30, almost 38% were using a LARC. So it's addressing some of, in addition to working on the individual, it's also getting at some of these upstream factors or drivers. There's the Reducing Repeat Pregnancies program. They're aimed for teen moms, the CAMI Plus, which is a computer-based programming that uses MI. And then there's the Teen Options program to prevent rapid pregnancy. I mean, these are really 4 of the programs that I am aware of that are on the Office of Population Affairs website here that are specifically focused on pregnant and parenting teens. There are others that indirectly affect or not specifically targeted at pregnant and parenting teens, but certainly help them. The Early Intervention Program, the New Heights Program in the DC area, Taking Charge curriculum. And then there's other programs like the Nurse Family Partnership, which is again a case management home visiting program that has an extensive evidence base there, not specifically targeted pregnant and parenting teens, but certainly supports them. Head Start, Healthy Families of America, and then evidence-based teen pregnancy prevention programs, such as an app I developed to help foster adolescent-centered contraceptive decision-making support. And there's a complete list at the Office of Population Affairs for that. So just in conclusion, and I know we're just over time, so bear with me. This population faces unique and numerous challenges, but with the right supports, teens can thrive, and so can their children. Continued education, emotional support, and access to resources are critical. These are affected by national, state, and local policies and programming. And there are opportunities at every level of the psychosocial framework where we can make impacts on individuals and their communities. And being with you all today gives me hope because there is power in our collective efforts to support not just these populations, but one another through these challenging times. So let's focus how we can build both the resilience of one another and the youth and families that we work with. Thank you.